It's lesson 7, part 2, and we want to just continue on with getting Passport started. We won't be totally finished, but we at least want to be able to see if it works, see if we can register and log in. Unfortunately, because our user model is extending Passport local mongoose, it has these methods already built in. So we don't really have to write our own methods for this. So next thing we need is we need register and login views, and then we need some links to them. We're not going to spend time creating the views. I've actually given you the code. It's on Blackboard. So what I'm going to do, inside of views, I'm going to right click my views folder. I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to make two new files, register.hbs, and then I'm also going to make login.hbs. So make register.hbs first. And it can just go right in the root of views. And then make a second view. So I'll make a new file and we'll call this one login.hbs. So these are just going to be standard static HTML with Bootstrap for the most part. So rather than us taking the time to code them, I've just put all the HTML up on Blackboard to save time. So create your two files, views register.hbs and views login.hbs. And then let's jump into the lesson 7 folder on Blackboard and we can just grab the HTML. So here's register. So let's just copy that, all of it, and paste it in. And I think I'm missing a closing field set tag at the bottom, which is not the end of the world, but oh yeah, I had it as a div tag, that closing tag, that's why. Okay, so it's got an H1. It has a form with the method of post. We have a username field that's required. Maybe actually I'll add type equals email in here as well. Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, let's add type equals email into the username as well. I had an end div tag. That last tag was div. I think at one point I had it as divs and then I changed it to field sets. We've got password, which is using a regular expression. So the password must be 8 characters with a lowercase and uppercase and a digit. A confirm password box. Later on, we can add some JavaScript to validate that these are the same. We'll leave that out for today. We're just going to keep it simple. And then a register button. We also have a link to load that goes to /login. So a user could go to the login form. I'll actually maybe just make those quick edits here. You can go ahead and then grab the code for the login view and paste that in as well. Trying to make it easy for you today. Type equals email. And down here, that should be an end field set. Same thing for login. Okay, thank you very much. So I've grabbed the I pasted the register code into login. So now I'm going to move. So our register form has a password and a confirm box. Of course, the login box simply has one password field. So now where do we go? We have these two views. Which file do we need to modify so that these pages can actually be loaded? Right. And we've got three controllers. So Maggie, which controller, or anybody else, which of our controllers, we actually got four, do we need to modify? Right, the index controller, because we're just right in the root. So we've got two get handlers already, one for index, one for about. So we want two new get handlers, one for register and one for login. So when we have a get request at /register, so when our path is /register, so what should happen in this method? User makes a get request at our site /register. This was one of the questions in the quiz. So what happens inside here so that, yeah, thank you, Maggie. We call res.render. We're going to load the view called register. And we could give it a title. It says, please create an account. Doesn't really matter what the message is. So if we try to load this URL /register in the browser, hopefully this is going to load the register view for us. Let's try it out. So I'm going to go back to my site. I'll go back to the root, but add /register. And now we get our register form with our HTML5 validation. For login, we just do the exact same thing. A get handler at the URL /login, and it will render the login view. So when our URL is /login, so this question straight out of the quiz, res.render, our view is called login. So exactly the same code, just different path, different view name, different page title. So you can go ahead and try this, try your login view as well. So I'll click my login link. Right, then it takes me to the login form. I click register. So that's cool. Correct. That's right, Barack. We're right in the root. Yep. I mean, if you had wanted to, you could have put it in the user's controller, but then you would need to make a views users and put them in there. I'm just going to do it in the root. Maybe for now, let's also add links. We'll move them later. Let's put register and login links in our nav bar. Because right now the user doesn't actually have any way to get to these pages, right? We go here, they don't know that there is any kind of register or login available. So we'll just open up our layout for a minute. I think if we add a separate UL, we can right align it. We'll do nav bar, nav, I think ML auto will right align it. So we're making a separate list. So these links are on the left of our nav bar. We want register and login, just kind of like in our .NET template, we want it over on the right. So we'll create two LIs. We use the same styles. So our first one will go to register. And then I'll create a second LI. So we'll have two links over on the right side of the nav bar, register and login. Next week, we can modify this, or after in our next class, we'll modify it so it also works like the .NET template, that when we're anonymous, we see register and log in. If we sign in, these links will disappear and we'll see our username and log out instead. But we can leave that for next class. I said, we're going to kind of go easy today. We'll just do the essential stuff. So here's the new section of our nav bar. Right, so now we get register and login over here on the right. So we're kind of getting somewhere. This is starting to look a little more functional, a little more polished. So now what we just need two more methods and we will call it a day. We need a post method for register and a post method for login, both of which are going to use Passport in our user model. So obviously we better do the register first. We can't log in until we have an account. So we'll need to handle the post method for register first. Fortunately, the method's not very difficult because we're leveraging Passport Local Mongoose. It's doing most of the work. So let's go back to our controller. And I'm going to put the post method underneath the get method for register. So in this case, we're going to use router.post /register. Our usual callback parameters, request response, and next. So we don't have to do a lot here. We're going to, we need a reference. We're going to need our user model here. So we're going to invoke the user model, which extends Passport Local Mongoose to create a new user in the DB. So in order to do this, we're going to need the user model. We're also going to need it to check in logins. We'll need to make a reference up at the top. So I'll come back to this method in a minute. User model for auth. So we'll put this reference up at the top. Because we need this model both for registering a user as well as for logging a user in. So add that reference up at the top of the file, and then we can come back down to our post. So because our user method, it plugs in, it extends Passport Local Mongoose, we can call a built-in method in there called register. And we are going to create a new user. So we pass in the username from our request.body.username field. Okay, that's coming from our first input called username. We have to pass in the password separately. So then we've got request.body.password. So I know the format looks a little weird. We're passing the username in as a JSON object. The password gets passed in separately. Why do you suppose that is? What's different about how the username and the password will be treated? Think about how they're going to get stored in the database. You got it, Justin. Right. We want to hash the password. So any regular properties like the username, or if we had other fields like phone number, first name, last name, they would be part of this JSON object, but the password has to get passed in separately so that it can be hashed. So password gets passed as separate parameter for hashing. So when we call register, one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to get an error or we will get a new user back from the database. So here's our callback. Call register, pass in the username and the password for hashing, and then evaluate if we got an error or we get a user account coming back. If we have an error, for now, we'll just take the user back to we'll just take them back and reload the register page for now. Otherwise, if it's successful, Passport will actually let us log the user in. So we can use our request object, and with Passport, we can call request.login. We want to log in our new user. And then we can redirect to the projects page. We're going to try and create a new user, pass in their username, pass in their password for hashing. Up to you, Justin. If you want, we could just redirect them to the login screen if you like. Totally up to you. I suppose it would be slightly more secure to have them go to the login screen and make them log in. So if you preferred that, you could just do res.redirect to log in without this request.login. Your choice. I'm going to put this whole method up on Pastebin and try it out. And then I'm going to connect to the data. I'm going to try to register, and then I'll connect to the database and see if I have a users collection that gets built and if there's an account there. And what this user.register, what does it actually look like? So I'll just create, I don't know, to make it simple. Just to make it simple, I would recommend everyone creates the same account. We'll have user@gc.ca. I'll put this in the chat. This way, in a couple weeks when you come back to class, you won't forget your login. So I'll create user@gc.ca, and my password, same as in .NET, capital T, test123 $sign. So I'm going to try to register. And it redirected me, so that's a good sign that it worked. To confirm, I want to go and look in my MongoDB. So I can open up Compass. Now, last week, there were two collections in the database. There was projects and there was courses. I should now have a users collection with one document in it. So I'm going to connect. And in my COMP2106, I've got 3 collections. That's encouraging. So I've got courses and projects with 4 documents each. And now, here we go. Boom. I have a users collection with 1 document. And here's my user. It's got my username. And it's got a unique salt and hash, so we don't see the password. So Passport takes care of all of this for us. Okay, great question, Justin. Can anybody explain what salt does? Why do we have both a salt and a hash? What does this salt mean? This is a good job interview question, by the way. Well, I'll give you a hint. If 2 users enter the exact same password, do we want the hash value to be identical in the database? Thank you, Maggie. It's random data that's used as an additional input to a one-way function that hashes the data. So it's like a random string, and it's used in the hashing algorithm. So this way, if we have 10 people that all enter the exact same password, the salt is used to ensure that each hash value is unique. It's sort of like an idea. It's used to guarantee uniqueness. So it's included in the algorithm. So hashing isn't enough, because hashing on its own doesn't guarantee uniqueness. It just guarantees that the plain text looks like this. Right. It's an extra layer. It's making sure that every hash is going to be unique. So I'll create a second user. I'll create a different user, but I'm going to put in the same password, and we'll see that the hash value is going to be different. So I'll go to Chrome and open up my site. I'll register again. And this time it'll be user2@gc.ca. I'm going to use the exact same password, test123$ with a capital T. So when you see the hash values here, you can see, so my first hash starts with AEB, second hash starts with C11. So this way it helps guarantee the uniqueness, and it's that extra layer of security. When we use the ASP.NET Identity Framework, it does the same thing. It stores both the hash password and what it called a security stamp. So that was basically a salt value. So Passport first generates this random salt for every user, and then it uses that salt value when it hashes the password to guarantee uniqueness. So it's harder to crack the passwords this way. Great question, Justin, and good answers, Maggie. Okay, does that help? Does that make sense? So we're just going to write one more method for today, and then it's reading week. Okay. So we can register a new account, but we want to try to log in. So right now we need a post handler for login, and it's fairly simple. So again, we're going to do router.post /login. So here we called user.register. In this case, we want to use Passport to authenticate the login attempt. So in here, actually, our parameters are a little different. This actually looks a bit different. We don't actually use request, response, and next in this case. Sorry, I'm going to move this. Their syntax is going to be a bit different. Going to look like this. We call passport.authenticate with a local strategy. And we can set out a few parameters that should be fairly self-explanatory. And this comes right from Passport. So we're just using. So if the login is successful, we're going to redirect to /projects. Whoops, I'm sorry, I missed. Hang on, my syntax a little broken. And another round bracket at the end. If the login fails, where should we take the user if they try to log in and it doesn't work? Where do you typically go when a login fails? Right, let's just take them to log in again. And the last thing we can do is create a message. We'll say invalid login. So when we get a post request, we're just going to use Passport. We're not using our regular request response method. Passport is going to handle the request. It's going to try and authenticate the user in the local database. If it's successful, they'll go to projects. If not, they just go back to the login screen. And then we're going to store this message in a session variable. So let's try this. First, I'm going to try an invalid login. Then I'll try a proper login. We'll try it out, and then we'll just need a little bit of code on our login screen so that if the login is invalid, we can display a message to the user. We're almost done. 10 more minutes, folks, I promise. Go. So first I'll put in an invalid login. What did I do? Passport not defined. So I missed something. How do I fix this? I'm going to call passport.authenticate. It says passport is not defined in our controller. Thank you, Hung. Yep, we just need to require passport at the top. I missed that step. That's okay. User model and passport. So be sure we reference passport at the top. Okay, now my app restarts. Cool. So make sure you reference the passport NPM package. Right. It should have been a clue to me that this was underlined before. I ignored the warning. Now it turns purple and bold. So I'll go back, try an invalid login. I know it's invalid because it just takes me back here. If I put in a valid login, I'm authenticated and I go to the project screen. So we've used Passport to do all our user validation. All we need to do is invoke it by calling passport.authenticate. So this is functional. When I put in a valid credential, I went to projects. When I put in an invalid login, it just reloaded the login page. The only problem with the failure is we're not giving the user any message telling them. We're creating a failure message. It's in the session, but we never actually show it to them. So when I put in a bad login, it just reloads, but I don't know, this is not ideal. So let's add just a little bit of logic on our view and in our get handler. Well, Justin, yeah, what we'll do, but we'll do it later, is once we log in, we're going to hide these links. but we won't do that today. So a great question. We'll come back to that in our next lesson. We'll leave it for today. We'll address it next time. So I'm going to modify the get handler a little bit. So what we want to do here is check for login error messages in the session object and display them if any. So here, when we fail, it creates a failure message in the session that says invalid login, but the user never sees it. So we'll just add a little bit of logic here to our get. We'll say let messages equal request.session.messages or an empty array. So if there are any session messages, we're going to store them. If not, messages will be empty. Then we'll clear them out of the session. And then when we're rendering the view and passing it the title, we can also now pass in this messages variable. So I'll put this updated version up on Pastebin. So check the session if there's any errors. If there are, store them in a local variable, clear out the session, and then we're going to pass those messages to our view. So that's all the logic in the controller. So we only have one more thing to do. At the top of our login view, we're going to check this messages variable. If there's anything in it, we want to display an error message and we want to show it in red. If this is empty, we'll just show a generic like please log in message and we'll maybe show that in blue instead. So we'll use this variable to determine what should go here above our form. This is the last thing we'll do today. We'll go back to login. And above our form, we'll use an HBS if statement. If we have any messages we'll create an alert with the danger class that says invalid login. If there are no messages, we'll create a blue alert. I'll use alert info. So users are going to see one of these two alerts at the top, but they won't see both. If there are no error messages in the session, they're going to see a blue alert that says, please enter your credentials. If they've tried to log in and it fails and they get redirected back here, we'll have an error message. We're going to display an error but display it in red. Let's try this out. So when I click login, I get this blue alert. But if I put in an invalid login, I get the red alert with this message. Okay, so it'll just toggle depending on if there's any error message in the session or not. So this part's now complete. We can register, we can log in, and we're properly handling and telling our user if their login is no good. We've configured Passport, we've built our user model, extending Passport Local Mongoose, and now we've got user accounts where passwords are being salted and hashed in the database. So what we'll want to do next week, we'll want to deal with the navigation bar. So anonymous users and authenticated users see different things. We'll maybe want it so only authenticated users can see our add course link, as well as can add, edit, or delete projects, that an anonymous user can see the data, but only an authenticated user can make any changes. Kind of like what we did in .NET. And then the third part we'll add is we'll add a third-party login. So on our login screen, we'll also allow someone to log in with their Microsoft account, for example. So we're going to need to add a new package for Passport to handle Microsoft. Oh, maybe it doesn't have Microsoft. Interesting. It has GitHub. So we'll maybe allow that, which is Microsoft now, maybe allow us to log in with our GitHub account. We could configure that next week. And by next week, I mean next class in 2 weeks. I will push everything up to GitHub now. Speaking of GitHub, I'll post our recordings when we're done. Are there any questions before we wrap up for the week? It's not for a while, Maggie. You have a while to do it. We'll go over it in 2 weeks. So when we come back, we'll look at assignment 2 as well as the tutorials, and we can start to come up with topics and organize those as well. So don't worry about that for now. You don't have to do anything in this class over the break. No, Radia, no, there isn't. Portfolio's done. I've also marked all the portfolios, so feel free to work on those, make any changes that you want to make. Totally fine. All the marking is done. Okay, so the code's just uploading. I'm going to stop the recording. No work over the reading week. I hope you all have a well-deserved break. And come back refreshed. We look forward to seeing you a week from Monday with your Project Studio presentations. I'll see the rest of you in 2 weeks. Take some time off, folks. Best you can. Thanks for joining me. Have a great reading week. I am around next week. If you need any help, just send me an email. We'll set something up. Radia, I'm also happy to chat with you too. Okay, bye, Nick. Bye, Barack. Have a good break.